When it comes to running a large brokerage, United Real Estate's president and COO, Rick Haase, has a very clear vision of how the company grows, what they do for their agents, and what their mission is. We discuss all of that and more, including some of the trends in the industry, the massive lawsuits that are happening right now, private listings, and all of those fun topics. So enjoy the episode. And a special thanks to HomeBot for sponsoring this episode of the Real Trending Podcast. So Rick, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining the Real Trending Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Tracey. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I think you're the second of January 2026 podcast that we have this year. So I appreciate you coming on. And because it's early in the year, there are so many predictions out there of what's going to happen. And we've called it the year of the lawsuit because it seems like they're just flying out there right now, specifically with the portals, but more, there's a lot of other ones out there too. So what changes or trends are you seeing that might impact how real estate professionals do business, or what keeps you up at night concerning some of the things going on?
Well, great question. One of the advantages of having time in the business like I have, getting in when I was 18 years old and seeing so much transformation of the industry, is that I tend not to be alarmed about things that are going on. But you're right, there's a lot going on, and it's the industry trying to find its center amidst a lot of what I would say noise. In fact, that's one of the things I'm coaching all of our people to pay attention to signal, not noise. Stay grounded in the fundamentals, kind of forward with the fundamentals, and be highly adaptive to what's coming when we know it's actually coming. Like there's a lot of conversation right now, Tracey, around private listing networks, but anybody who's been in it for a long time knows that pocket listings, that's what we called it back then. Pocket listings have been around since the beginning of time. And in the real estate brokerage industry, the whole notion of that is very interesting. It's taken on a new dynamic. And I think fear is driving a lot of the action and interaction. To elaborate just a little bit on that, if you think about companies and leadership is all about creating differentiation for their company. And through that differentiation, they can gain strategic competitive advantage. But strategic competitive advantage is a very elusive pursuit. It's important and you need it, but when it violates a fundamental principle of basic guns and butter economics, I'll give you an example. Supply and demand says, in order to achieve the seller's mission on real estate sales, you should create as much demand as possible. To create as much demand as possible, typically you do that through widest possible area of coverage or widest possible exposure. So there's the fundamental: create more exposure, create therefore more demand, sell the property at its optimal price in a short period of time, and eliminate as many contingencies and problems for the seller. All right, so if I'm going to try to find a competitive advantage in today's market, I know that inventory shortages, and there are still massive inventory shortages, particularly in price points that are accessible to the typical or average buyer. So if you have the ability to hoard listings and pull them into a private listing network and take them into your company, then ostensibly you'd be able to have more people follow your website, make sure you get more buyer traffic, and therefore have a benefit to buyers who shop for you and agents who work with you. Now, that's a great idea, and it's been tried many times before. And there's anybody who really fears that just hasn't done the math. I mean, post-acquisition of Anywhere, as an example, Compass will probably have somewhere between 12 and 15% of active listing inventory. You can't dominate or act like a monopoly in an oligopoly market pattern with 15% of the market. That's just not, by definition, that doesn't work. So, but to create a strategic competitive advantage and in the process violate a fundamental economic principle of supply and demand, then that is short-lived. I think the whole concept of private listing networks today is a massive red herring and stuff that people are talking about, but not something that's going to get traction. That's a good example of what's going on and kind of how I'm perceiving it.
What about, we recently interviewed a broker in Florida who sued a buyer on breach of contract for buyer-broker agreement or buyer representation agreement, and he won. Do you see, there are obvious cons to that as far as reputational and, working with other buyers. But do you see that as being something that might go further, or is that maybe just a one-off or what are you seeing with buyer representation?
Well, if you think about what's happened is the industry has been taught through court losses and settlements that we need to be clear about our expectations and how we get paid on the buyer side of the equation. And in order to do that, you sign a contract. Well, contract law takes over, and if you violate that contract, then you're susceptible to whatever comes through a court process. I don't think it'll be widespread for the reason you just brought up. Tracey, you can't build a great reputation in a region, in a marketplace, by suing buyers. But under some circumstances, I can see how it would be warranted.
So, Rick, I want to talk a little bit more about private listing networks because you had some interesting things to say. Is there anything else you want to share about them and what's going on in the industry right now with the lawsuits and everything that's going on with private listing networks? Yeah,
Tracey, we can talk for a long, long time about that, but there's a couple of key points. And one of them is that, private listing networks and being creative about having competitive advantage. The first thing I'd like to say is that organizations absolutely need to start talking about, straight talk about why they're doing it. Instead of putting out the notion of private listing networks being consumer centric, and they all have their advantages in some cases. But what we really need to focus on is that there's something going on within our industry that's much more potentially damaging to it than private listings. And that has to do with my belief is that no trade organization or no individual competitor in that space should have the right to dictate to small businesses how they can go after competitive advantage or because it's a stifling of competition. So private listing networks, they'll work or they won't. And if they work, great, somebody wins more market share. And if they don't, then they don't do well for the consumer, and therefore they don't do well for the company that's trying to promote them, and they'll stop them. Just let the market answer that question. But in no event should an individual competitor or a trade organization try to intervene or collaborate to intervene to tell a company how to do their business. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's anti-capitalist, it's anti-American. And let's have some straight talk about why we're doing all that stuff. Everybody's position in that debate is couched in what I call the non-straight talk. It's how it benefits the buyers, how it benefits the sellers, how it doesn't benefit them, when really what they want to do is eliminate it or promote it to gain competitive advantage, which is one of the greatest things about this industry. It's an incredibly fragmented business that is, and we can talk about consolidation too, but it's an incredibly fragmented business that through the natural competitive cycle finds its way. Shared listings. When I got into the real estate business, there was no MLS. And then it became, let's share, because if we share, we can be more effective for buyers and sellers. Mm-hmm. And we'll sell properties faster and for more money and with fewer problems. So that evolution that got us to shared inventory was a natural byproduct of the industry growing up, evolving, and maturing. So if in fact the time has come to change that, then the market will speak and it'll thrive. And my personal belief is that, you violate a fundamental rule of supply and demand, and you're not going to be successful in that effort. And it's a byproduct of the current times, short inventory. Believe me, if we're back in some of the other market cycles where there was too much inventory on the market and it was purely a buyer's market and sellers were having their prices driven down, there'd be no talk about hoarding or harboring listings, keeping them close to the vest. It's a market anomaly.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because, even with the Compass Zillow lawsuit, Zillow is an individual company who can make that decision, I guess. And Compass, it's really a difficult one. I think that people are short-sighted when it comes to hating on companies. They just automatically they find the demon in it. When a lot of these companies are just trying to do what's best for their bottom line, which is capitalism. It's not necessarily what's best for the buyer or seller, though.
Well, but won't the market prove that out? If I do anything,
Yes.
If I make a policy inside of our company and it doesn't bode well, it doesn't champion the buyer's efforts or the seller's efforts, then that marketplace is going to hand me my hat and tell me, thanks for stopping by, you're done. And our agents would lose business, our business units would decline. So we have to be very careful to do that. But the market will speak. Make no mistake about it, the market will speak. And like I said, a lot of programming in our industry tends to be very time sensitive. And like you said, the short game. But again, it violates every sensibility I have to have a third party entity tell us which decisions we can make in order to try to have us have a thriving business. I think it's brilliant to try. I think it's brilliant to see if they can. Anybody who's trying to do it can morph that. But think about this. Let's call it what it is. Compass is is leading the charge. Is right at the heart of that discussion. And if right now, I think Compass has about 5.6 or 6% of the overall listing market in the country. Post anywhere, they might be up to 12 to 15%, and that's with no breakage on the acquisition. Okay. So if they end up at 12 to 15%, you're just they're not going to shift the market.
Right.
Do the math. Stop worrying about it. That's good. Yeah. That's the difference between noise and signal.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show how segmented the market is. If a gigantic company like Anywhere can, merge with a gigantic company like Compass and still only have 12 to 15%. And of course, they have higher market share in certain markets. But I think that those will be handled individually as if this merger or acquisition actually comes to fruition too. So
yeah, and then those marketplaces will be competitive with each other, and they'll find different competitive advantage to pull customers back into their world. So let the business engine find its way. My thought on it.
So I want to talk a little bit about United. So you have talked about your agent centric. What does that actually mean in practice, and where do most brokerages get that wrong?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting way you asked the question, because I actually think you answered it in the question. It's in practice that it goes wrong. Being crystal clear, like I've been around and in companies and led companies that if I walked into a principal broker's office and I stood in front of the plaque on the wall that said, "Here's our mission," and I asked that broker, "What's our mission?" And you can just kind of see them like looking around, trying to get past it. The mission isn't operationalized. It's not even ingested properly. So the first thing is you must be mission centric and have a mission that includes that agent centricity. In our company, it's very clear. There isn't one broker, you can call them all. They would not miss the point that our mission is to improve the financial trajectory of our brokers and agents' careers and lives. That's not something we say, but that's a focal point. That's our mission. How do we do that then comes when we operationalize it in everyday decisioning. So improving the financial trajectory doesn't just include top line revenue. How much money can you make here? It includes what do you do with that? So we have pillars that financial wellness is built on. The first one is flowing as much gross commission income into our agents' bank accounts as possible. The second one is financial literacy. What do you do with that money? How do you pay down debt and increase savings? And what are the vehicles to be able to do that? And here's a good example. So we don't just say that, pay attention, be financially literate. We bought Dave Ramsey's Smart Dollar, a very expensive proposition, but every one of our agents, every one of the agents inside of our company, brokers and their family members, have a seat on Dave Ramsey's Smart Dollar platform. We don't get to see what goes into that program, but we know the adoption rates, and we know that today we're at about $6 million of financial turnaround in the last 24 months. What that means is our agents have not only made a high percentage of the gross commission income, because we're a transaction fee model company, we succeed in that. Somewhere around 96%, 96.5% of gross commission goes into our agents' accounts. That's their money. Now they have a platform. What do I do with it? So $6 million turnaround on a couple thousand agents in a very short period of time means they paid down their debt and increased their savings to amass a net worth enhancement of $6 million. That's an example of operationalizing the mission. Okay,
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then in addition to that, financial hardship and bankruptcies in America, the number one reason is underinsured or non-insured healthcare crisis. So we have a healthcare program that's incredible for our agents, independent contractors. These aren't easy financial decisions to make, but if you're serious about your mission, you go make that happen. And then we have private banking services that are only available to people who have $2 million AUM and assets under management. And before they get to that stage, do they have those services? Well, in our company, they do. So, and it's before they get to 2 million level, which is the majority of the population. So we know that our agent base is they're going to be well cared for from the top line to how they manage themselves financially. Then as they have some success and have $75,000 in assets under management, they can avail themselves of some private banking. And then on the operating expense side for each of their businesses, we make sure that we're delivering whatever tools and services that we can deliver at zero cost to them, or at we use a philosophy called a partial cost recovery. When we have to pass a cost on to our agents, it's absolutely a portion of the cost that they would pay. So they have purchasing power that's well lower than they would at another real estate brokerage.
Yeah, absolutely. There are also, you've done a lot of M&A, and I think you've kind of moved away some based on the market recently and moved into some of your other growth pillars. Talk to me a little bit about that and what United's strategy is for growth moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. So if you think about what's happened in the last 10 years in real estate, we went from 1 million to 1.6 and change. Now the market's readjusting. This happens again, the experience, it happens in every protracted growth cycle. Lots of agents get in the business. So what happens is those companies that spin out of existing companies and they get to 50 agents and 100 agents and 200 and 400. When the market contracts like it has over the last nearly 4 years now, we're in our fourth year of contraction. When that happens, those companies have to figure out, how do I get the critical mass of business and revenue flowing? And if they can't, then there's a great opportunity for them to join our company, drop their operating expenses nearly completely out, and in some cases completely out. And if they have their agent base utilize the tools, tool services and supports that we have for them, and we've created, and that's one of the things about Dan and I, is we've created a lot of mergers and acquisitions without a cookie cutter. Every one of them is different, and every one of them is extremely manageable. But it starts with getting that that clay, fresh clay on the table, and everybody putting their hands on the clay, not trying to squeeze an individual seller's wants and needs into that, like I said, that cookie cutter environment. So our growth vectors are, of course, organic recruiting. Every day, blocking, tackling, and a couple thousand, actually 5,100 of our agents came to us that way last year. So 5,100 organic. And then we have some brokers who are, they want to roll in and walk over their 50 agents or 60 agents or 49 agents. These are real walk-ins and rollovers. 87 agents, 26 agents, 51 agents, 32 agents. These don't sound like great numbers, big numbers, but in the aggregate, we're growing organically in a marketplace that's going from 1.6 down to probably 1 million by the time we're done. NAR says I think they budgeted on 1.2 million for the coming year. It's interesting to see that happening, because if they're budgeting at 1.2, yet they publish 50% of the real estate agents in the country didn't do a sale last year, then those are agents at attrition risk. So net of attrition, we're a positive grower without mergers and acquisitions. You kind of alluded to the fact that we're not pressing pedal to the metal on acquisitions. The entire asset class is repricing. That's what happens in contracting markets. So that repricing gives us the opportunity to kind of show off how we know how to make transactions work, preventing downside risk for us, and at the same time giving upside opportunity for the person who's the seller, for the owner. And because we think about it that way, we've had a lot of success. And so I wouldn't say that we've taken our foot off the accelerator. I think we slowed the closure rate as a normal occurrence in the marketplace. Somebody investigates the value of their company with us. We make sure that they understand what it looks like now in traditional valuation methodology, and then what it could look like over time with some of the transaction skill sets that we have. So,
yeah. And so what are some of the kind of non-negotiable habits or operating principles that have fueled your growth?
Non-negotiable is looking for the right people. I say this pretty frequently, as we might have even talked about it before, but when you talk about mergers and acquisitions, the P&L is important, and the P&L benefit is important. The balance sheet's important, but the real strength that we get through acquisition is in the intellectual capital, the commitment, the passion of the people who built these companies in the first place. I know what it sounds like. I know it sounds naive. It sounds soft. It sounds like something you say. Much more valuable to our company than the company that we're acquiring is the people who got it there in the first place. Those people they're the real gold. Peter Drucker, I was part of the Drucker Foundation for a long while, and Peter Drucker had a saying, which was, there's no such great a waste of time as to do things with great alacrity that should never be done at all. And I think a lot of acquisitions get done conceptually on a spreadsheet first. And they talk about shared ownership or acquired ownership, but they don't talk about acquired leadership and managership. And that's a huge mistake. The money's the easy part. It really is. We could do structured transactions that help somebody win on the upside when the market comes back so they don't sell at the bottom. We can do partial acquisitions. All of that stuff is easy. What's really important is, can we find a landing spot that meets what that current owner wants to do with the next 5-10 years of their life, or in some cases, the next 1 year of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of large, like the Compass Anywhere, I mean, there aren't many more companies to buy at this point. So it makes sense that you're looking for those opportunities from smaller brokerages that are meaningful and have leaders that are also great leaders. So
well,
that
the
makes
other thing though is if you think about in the last 2 years, we've had a 1,500 agent company join our network. That's one of the largest franchise affiliations in the last 25 years. Then we had a 900 agent affiliation. We didn't buy their company. They just wanted to avail themselves of the OpEx savings and the vision and the partnership and the collective capital. Like a lot of the brokers, Tracey, are getting very, this is a time where you can become very weary of trying to figure out, what do I pay attention to? How do I get enough buying power to bring those assets into my current company?
Yeah.
And they just, it's a tiring thing to push that rock up the hill all by yourself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what's thematic in the 12 or 14 that we've done in the last 6 years, well, 5.5 or 6 years, what's thematic is an owner who says, I'm thinking probably 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
And I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go do something else. That happens a lot. And then, a year later, they're like, I'm having fun again. I'm not trying to lift the load myself. And they're having fun, so they stay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do have a question on, there's been a lot of chatter about the NAR settlement possibly being overturned. I know it's a prediction of Rob Hahn, but I've heard it from multiple people now in the industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. The overturn is a very complex unwind.
Yeah.
The pure overturn. So with all due respect to people who are predicting that that'll happen, I'm not in that camp. But I think there'll be accommodations made to lessen the impact of what they did. I know this isn't part of your question, but 88 companies left out in the cold on a trade organization that had, there's so much deep-seated bitterness about that occurrence that is going to be impacting NAR one way or another. And it's like, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. The pay me later for NAR is so much more costly. So if they want, but the restructuring of NAR, the divestiture of assets they shouldn't have as a nonprofit. I've run nonprofits multiple times in my life. And, the asset accumulation that and the self-dealing and the millions of dollars in salaries and all the things that you've heard tell about, those things have to be restructured, and they will. That's a different topic than the reversing of this account. But I don't really think it'll be overturned as such. I think the impact will be muted by other types of changes. But clearly, it's very interesting. The whole idea of a class actions were not devised to function like they just did. And I'm not sure what series of events happened. I have some good ideas, but I don't want to speculate here about what has to happen in order for that 2-week trial and damages phase to actually have happened. It's quite an event. So I think the effects will be muted by actions taken going forward, but I don't think it'll be completely overturned. I hate to have to round up all those sellers and ask them for their $16 back.
Exactly.
I'm in a room with $8,000 worth of lawyers per hour, and I remember saying something naive like, "How much are sellers gonna actually get back? Do the math on this thing; it doesn't work out." And they said, "Well, don't make no mistake about it. Class actions benefit the lawyers; they don't benefit
absolutely.
They don't benefit consumers." If there's a business process change on the other side, if there's a business process change that added more clarity, I'm all for it. More transparency, I'm all for it.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what do you believe will separate brokers that merely survive the next 5 years with those who actually grow and thrive?
Number one is having the right mission. I mean, number one, like we just finished our annual operating plan process for 2026. We're paying attention to 4 categories, making sure that we have the financial fortitude by reducing operational expenses and investing in those things like AI that are very transformational to the industry eventually. Talent attraction at all levels, from employees to business unit leaders to branch operations. And then especially and probably most importantly, attracting the right agents that are passionate, integrity driven. So we have financial fortitude, making sure that we're there. Talent attraction systems have to be in place, making sure that we do everything we do, maintaining our cultural North Star, remaining who we are in the business process. For instance, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we've got this great idea. It's going to be very lucrative for our agents or our consumers, and it ruins our effort at getting to mission, which is to improve the financial trajectory of our brokers and agents' careers and lives, we're not going to do it. So making sure that we still operate in a way that's consistent with our culture, and then operational excellence, having the disciplines in place to have the systems, to run the systems, and make sure we're executing so that we're not. I'll give you an example. If we took the average American consumer now and we ran that Rocket mortgage or that Rocket program that says, show me all of my subscriptions, there are millions and probably hundreds of millions of subscriptions that people signed up for don't even know they did. That's not a disciplined approach to running your personal finances. And in a real estate business, it's very easy to layer cost on cost on cost and never subtract from that. So we call it delayering the onion. You've got to take cost out when it's not effective. And you have to be disciplined to know, does the ad of that tool or service support the mission? And if it doesn't, or it damages our ability to do that, we don't do it.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thanks so much for joining Real Trending. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I know Dan is going to be at the Housing Economic Summit. Will you be there as well?
Yeah, I'll be there. It's in Dallas, I think, right?
Yeah, I'll be there too. So
I'm looking forward to it. That's going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rick. And I will see you in February.
See you soon, Tracey.